Welcome to my channel, and today I want to share a story that will grip you from the very first moment and refuse to let go. A story about a young woman who stumbles into a world of danger, trust, and impossible choices where survival depends on courage, split-second decisions, and the fragile bonds that form between strangers thrown together by fate. It's about Emily Harrison, a delivery driver whose life is turned upside down when she finds a wounded man and two helpless infants in the middle of a storm, and how a single act of bravery sets off a chain of events that will test every limit of her strength, loyalty, and heart. Clara Benson found him collapsed in a slick pool of black ice and darker blood, his fingers clutching two infant car seats like they were the only anchors tethering him to the world, as if letting go would mean surrendering everything. Rain pelted down in relentless sheets, drumming against the windshield of her aging minivan, the wipers flailing in a losing battle against the storm. Clara's chest twisted with a strange, unexpected relief as she killed the engine, the familiar grind of the van quieting into silence. Pulling her hood up against the cold, she stepped into the downpour, the slick ground sending chills up her legs, and froze as a thermal bag slipped from her numb hands. Her feet moved on their own, driven by instinct rather than thought, and her breath caught in her throat when she saw the man beside the car seats. His body battered, his eyes fluttering open, dark, almost black in the shadowed alley filled with pain and something else that sent her heart racing. Sir, can you hear me?" she asked, voice trembling as he responded in a whisper, thick with an accent she couldn't place. His hand twitched weakly, shaking, and Clara's blood seemed to freeze in her veins as she pressed both hands to his shoulders, grounding him, refusing to let him slip away while the babies screamed, shrill and raw, stirring memories of her father's death in a mangled car crash, of her mother's final breaths in a sterile hospital room calling her name. Clara's eyes darted to the twins, and with a steadiness she barely felt, she grabbed one car seat, heavier than anticipated, whispering words of comfort over it, before snatching the second, feeling the man tremble as she supported him against the van. She ran back for the babies, holding them against her chest, their cries softening to exhausted whimpers as they took in her presence, their tiny eyes wide and unnervingly aware. It was enough to make her whisper reassurances she wasn't even sure she believed. With her heart hammering, Clara lifted him into the passenger seat of the minivan, gripping the wheel with shaking hands. As she drove at reckless speed, running red lights, the frame rattling under her push, every sound of the road pressing into her chest. She parked finally in front of her building, killing the engine, letting the silence wash over her, before bracing herself in the rain to half-carry, half-drag him up the stairs, pausing to steady his collapsing weight, ignoring the curious glance of a neighbor in 2B who opened her door and closed it again without a word. Inside her tiny studio apartment, a cramped space on the third floor that smelled faintly of mildew and cheap carpet. She set the car seats on the futon and let him slump against the wall, blood seeping into the floorboards beneath him. Clara's voice broke as she surveyed the scene. Torn suit jacket, wounds she could see, but barely comprehend, and a man who looked like he'd been ripped from another life and dropped into hers. Her hands moved with a precision she didn't know she possessed, cutting away fabric, pressing gauze, suturing torn flesh with neat, deliberate stitches, born of countless hours practicing on dummies that had never bled or breathed or pressed back. The smell of gunpowder and expensive cologne mixed with iron and rain, and she bandaged him tightly, her hands brushing against bare skin, feeling the warmth beneath the blood. Turning to the car seats, she realized she had no formula, no bottles, no diapers. And yet the man's grey, pained eyes were fixed on the twins with an intensity that made her chest ache. She warmed the bottles in the microwave, testing the temperature on her wrist like she had long ago when babysitting as a teen. A flicker of protective fury rising inside her at the thought that a man could have run for hours with infants without respite, forcing herself to feed them carefully, ensuring each swallow and breath was safe. The babies settled, one asleep against her shoulder, the other drinking slowly, their tiny hands reaching up, testing the space between them and the dangerous, wounded man bleeding beside her. Clara's gaze finally fell on him in the harsh light of the single overhead bulb. Strong jaw, sharp cheekbones, a mouth rarely smiling, and eyes that betrayed everything he was trying to hide. She changed the twins, fumbling through the motions, then returned to him, urging him to rest. aware of the closeness, the tension, the charged air that made her own heartbeat almost impossible to ignore. Words spilled from her mouth without thought. Her name whispered back from him in a voice that wrapped around it like smoke, freezing her blood. She realized in a jarring, terrifying moment the truth of the danger, the truth of the bond forming between them and the children. And yet, she did not hesitate. Blankets, pillows, makeshift beds, every small gesture a promise she did not fully understand but could not break. They survived the night, through panic, screaming, blood, and exhaustion. Clara moving with mechanical efficiency, while her mind processed the chaos, watching the dangerous man beside her tend to the twins, the intensity in his gaze never leaving them. By morning, the radiator worked. A small relief as he repaired what he could, his hands steady despite wounds, his presence electric in the confined space. Clara forced herself into routine, driving, feeding, changing, securing, always vigilant, always tense, yet slowly recognizing a strange trust between them. The bridge built with trembling hands, whispered reassurances, and the shared weight of the children. Questions spilled out. Why bring infants into danger? Why run through violence and blood? His answers were measured, calm, terrifyingly composed, revealing the depth of the threat around them and the ruthless world he belonged to. Clara's past, the deaths, the loneliness, the debt, the endless grind, faded in comparison to the immediate necessity. Survival, safety, protecting the twins, and tending to the man whose life she had chosen to save. Through the night and into daylight, every small action was a survival calculus. Changing bandages, cleaning bottles, monitoring the twins, balancing fear with action, understanding that every choice carried consequence, yet feeling the slow, steady growth of connection between them. Fragile and trembling, but undeniable. And in that small studio apartment, amid the blood, rain, exhaustion, and fear, Clara began to see a future she could barely imagine. One where trust, danger, love, and responsibility intertwined. Where her hands, once so accustomed to sterile practice, were now instruments of life, care, and protection. The rhythm of her movements syncing with the heartbeat of the wounded man and the fragile, breathing twins in her care. By morning, Clara's body was screaming with exhaustion, her muscles tight, her hands raw from hours of holding, feeding, and changing the twins. Yet her eyes snapped open to the sound of crying, blood-stained sheets, and scattered supplies, serving as a stark reminder of the chaos that had become her life. The wounded man, now clearly a figure of both strength and vulnerability, was sitting on the edge of the futon, his body taut despite the injuries, the gun resting lightly in his hand, and his eyes sharp, tracking every movement she made. Clara pushed herself up, limbs trembling, and fell into the mechanical rhythm of survival. Bottles warmed and tested, diapers changed with methodical precision, and each small sigh or whimper from the twins met with swift, practiced attention. Yet even amid the routine, she could not ignore the tension radiating from him, the way he studied her, and the subtle electricity that seemed to coil in the tiny studio apartment, with each shared glance, each brush of skin, as she handed him a baby to soothe. He was not just injured. He was a man carrying the weight of unseen worlds, dangerous, precise, and yet capable of tenderness that seemed almost impossible given the circumstances. Questions churned in Clara's mind. Who were these people chasing him? Why was he here? Why had he risked everything to protect these children? Every answer came piecemeal, measured, and edged with the menace of a life she could not imagine surviving. And yet as she worked, she could not deny the small, piercing threads of connection that were weaving through the chaos, binding her to him in a way that made her pulse quicken, even as her body begged for rest. They talked in fragmented sentences, clipped observations and careful confessions, the stolen deliveries, the hacked security systems, the betrayal and manipulation surrounding them, and the cruel calculus that dictated that every step, every decision, could mean life or death. Clara watched the man cradle the twins, her chest tightening as she realized how fragile and extraordinary the trust between them had become. The silent acknowledgement that without her intervention, without her hands pressing against his wounds and hers against the car seats, none of them would have survived the night. The day passed in a blur of cautious movements and whispered orders. the air thick with tension and the faint metallic smell of blood still clinging to their clothes. When a moment of respite came, Clara allowed herself to glance at him more closely. The sharpness of his features softened only by exhaustion and the rare flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. She saw not the imposing figure he projected to the world, but a man bound by responsibility, fear, and the fierce protective love for the twins, a love that mirrored her own instinctual drive to safeguard life at all costs. Plans were whispered over the hum of the radiator, strategy forming in fragmented pieces. A safe house, secure routes, careful observation, and the calculated avoidance of anyone who could track them. Every movement became a delicate dance, Clara's every instinct on high alert. Her body coiled like a spring, yet paradoxically soothed by the presence of someone who trusted her implicitly. They moved through the city with quiet precision, navigating darkened streets, abandoned alleys, and quiet industrial zones. The twins sleeping against their bodies as the Van S engine hummed under Clara's careful control. The weight of responsibility pressed on her chest with every mile. The knowledge that a single misstep could destroy the fragile equilibrium they had built. And yet, even as fear and adrenaline surged, Clara found herself noticing the little details. The way he adjusted his grip on the babies. The quiet way he spoke to her when the children were asleep. The brief, unguarded moments when his pain softened his features and revealed a man she could see herself trusting. Perhaps even relying upon in ways she had never allowed herself before. They reached the outskirts of the city as night began to fall, the safe house looming like a fortress in the dim glow of streetlights, and Clara's pulse quickened at the thought of finally having a semblance of security. Yet as they approached, her instincts screamed caution. The Van S lights cut shadows sharply across abandoned lots, the empty streets stretching ominously, and the knowledge that danger could be lurking behind any door or fence kept her hands steady on the wheel, despite the exhaustion that clawed at her limbs. When they finally parked behind the nondescript warehouse that would serve as a temporary sanctuary, Clara's hands shook as she lifted the twins from the car seats, her body humming with tension and relief, her eyes scanning every shadow. He moved with deliberate precision, checking locks, testing doors, positioning himself strategically as though the world were an extension of his own body, every gesture speaking of a life lived in constant vigilance and danger. Inside, Clara set the twins on the first bed while he secured the perimeter, his gun never leaving his hands, his eyes sharp, calculating, yet softened briefly as they lingered on the sleeping children. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe, to let the exhaustion crash over her, even as adrenaline kept her senses keyed to the slightest sound, and then the chaos returned. The sudden presence of intruders, a rush of movement, the harsh clicks of weapons, and Clara's instincts kicking in with ruthless efficiency, the wrench she had grabbed earlier heavy in her hands as she moved to protect the babies. Her body remembered the lessons of survival instinct, reflexes honed in countless past emergencies, and she moved with deadly precision, coordinated with the wounded man beside her, each action a step in a lethal dance of survival. They neutralized threats, secured the babies, and escaped the immediate danger, adrenaline surging through Clara's veins as she realized the depth of what they had just survived. Breathless, bloodied, but alive, she sat with the twins cradled against her chest, the world narrowed to the warmth of their bodies and the presence of the man who had become her anchor amid the storm. In those brief moments, amid the chaos, Clara glimpsed the fragile threads of a new reality forming, a family forged not by convenience or tradition, but by necessity, courage, and the willingness to risk everything for the life of another. Every heartbeat, every glance, every whispered word became a testament to survival, trust, and the strange, dangerous intimacy that only such extreme circumstances could create. She understood that the road ahead would be perilous, that danger waited in every shadow, that choices carried irrevocable consequences. Yet she also understood that she had found something irreducible, a purpose beyond herself, a connection that would endure, a family she had chosen through courage, fear, and love. And as she finally allowed herself to rest, even briefly, with the twins asleep and the man watching over her, Clara knew that whatever lay ahead, she would face it with unflinching determination, her heart anchored by the lives she now held dear, the storm outside forgotten in the fragile warmth and tenuous security they had carved from a violent world. Clara Benson barely slept that night, curled on the floor between the futon and the twin car seats, listening to the faint, steady breaths of the children and the shallow, guarded rhythm of the wounded man nearby. Every creak of the old warehouse, every drip of water from the leaking roof made her flinch. Her body had not known true rest since she had first pressed her hands to his bloodied chest in the alley. Morning came with a muted grey light filtering through grime-streaked windows, revealing the state of the room. Blood-stained sheets folded hastily, bottles drying on the counter, bandages and gauze scattered like breadcrumbs marking the trail of survival. The man, now clearly a figure of authority of lethal experience and quiet vulnerability, moved with deliberate purpose. Despite his injuries, checking locks, testing windows, and guiding her through the routines of feeding and caring for the twins as though he had always done it. Though every movement revealed the physical toll the night had taken. Clara's hands, though still shaking from fatigue, moved methodically, warmed bottles, measured formula, checked bandages, and changed diapers, all under the watchful, unspoken supervision of the man whose presence had become a tether to her own sanity. Questions pressed relentlessly. Why had he risked so much for these children? What world had he come from that demanded such precision and violence in order to survive? Every answer he offered was sparse, clipped, loaded with the threat of unseen enemies, yet in those moments of quiet collaboration, a bond solidified between them, fragile but undeniable, born of shared responsibility and mutual trust forged in fire. As the morning stretched into afternoon, Clara's gaze lingered on him more often than she cared to admit. The strength in his posture, the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes softened as he glanced at the twins, and the subtle, fleeting vulnerability that betrayed the layers he did not allow the world to see. When the first distant sound of pursuit reached the warehouse, her body tightened, instincts flaring, and she acted with mechanical precision, moving the twins into safer positions, preparing the van, coordinating silently with him, a dangerous choreography of survival that neither could afford to misstep. The chase was a blur of rain-slicked streets, screeching tires, and heart-pounding calculations. Clara gripping the wheel as though it were a lifeline the twins secured in the back, and the man beside her orchestrating defensive maneuvers with calm efficiency despite his injuries. Each turn, each evasive maneuver heightened the stakes, yet Clara's trust in him, tempered by fear, tempered by exhaustion, remained unbroken, an invisible anchor in the chaos. They found temporary refuge in an abandoned industrial lot, the van's engine idling softly in the shadows. The children quiet in her arms. He moved with careful precision, scouting entrances, positioning himself, ready for any threat. While Clara's hands shook as she lifted the babies, adjusting blankets, checking temperatures, and trying to force calm into her own racing heartbeat. Even in these brief moments of reprieve, the weight of their predicament pressed down on her. The van's fragility, their limited supplies, the relentless pursuit of invisible enemies, and the fragility of the bond that had formed between her, the man, and the twins. She realized with both awe and fear that the only reason they had survived so far was their synergy. The combination of her empathy, skill, and quick thinking with his experience, precision, and willingness to fight, to bleed, and to risk everything for the children. Hours bled into a tense twilight as they moved again, stealth and urgency dictating every step, navigating back roads, shadowed alleys, and abandoned parking structures. Each location selected with a mix of instinct and careful calculation, the twins' well-being an unspoken compass guiding every decision. Clara felt the weight of responsibility press on her chest, each heartbeat a reminder that failure meant catastrophe. Yet the man beside her moved with a quiet authority that allowed her mind to focus, even while her body trembled with exhaustion and adrenaline. When at last they arrived at a secondary safe house, an unremarkable warehouse turned sanctuary. Clara's relief was palpable, though fleeting. Doors were secured, windows barred, and every possible entrance checked and double-checked, yet the sense of imminent danger lingered like a shadow. Here, in the stillness of the dimly lit space, she finally allowed herself a measure of reflection, marveling at the improbable chain of events that had brought her from a life of debt, grief, and isolation to a place where survival, trust, and the nascent bonds of family interwove so tightly it hurt to breathe. She watched the man cradle the twins, marveling at the tenderness that belied his lethal exterior, realizing that she had stumbled into a world of violence and danger that demanded everything of them, but had also given her a purpose she had never known: to protect, to save, to nurture, and to trust. Conversation between them remained minimal, strategic, and measured, yet in the silences in the shared tasks of feeding, cleaning, and securing, an unspoken understanding formed. Survival was paramount, yet beneath it, something deeper, something human and fragile had begun to grow. When evening fell, Clara allowed herself to settle between the futon and the twin car seats, her body aching, her mind racing with strategies for the next day. Yet her heart felt a strange, unfamiliar warmth as she listened to the slow, steady breathing of the children and the man who had become her protector and companion. The night passed with tense vigilance, punctuated by sudden alarms or distant noises that forced her hands to tighten around the twins, her pulse spiking in anticipation. Yet the bond of trust between them held, taut but unbroken, a lifeline in the storm. Days stretched into a rhythm of preparation, movement, and survival, punctuated by brief flashes of humanity. Shared smiles, quiet reassurances, the gentle weight of a baby in arms, the fleeting softness in his eyes when he glanced at her, and the slow realization that they were building something impossible, yet undeniable. A fragile family in a world that had offered them nothing but danger and violence. And through it all, Clara understood that their lives had irrevocably changed. Every instinct sharpened, every sense heightened, every heartbeat dedicated to the protection of the twins and the man who had risked everything for them, forging an unbreakable chain of reliance, courage, and unexpectedly trust. Clara Benson felt the cold bite of morning air as she and the wounded man, now clearly more than just a protector, prepared for the next phase of survival. The twins strapped securely in their car seats, blankets tucked tightly around them, each movement deliberate, every glance filled with the unspoken knowledge that danger was always closer than they imagined. The safe house, though temporary, had offered only brief respite. Their pursuers were patient, relentless, and calculated, and Clara's instincts screamed that one misstep could undo all the fragile progress they had made. As she started the van, the man beside her scanned the perimeter, gun resting lightly in his hand, his eyes sharp and unreadable, a combination of fatigue, determination, and something softer, almost human, flickering in their depths whenever he glanced at the twins. The city streets blurred past in a patchwork of shadow and neon as Clara drove every corner. Every alleyway scrutinized the twins, quiet for the first time in hours, lulled by the soft hum of the engine and the subtle rhythm of her heartbeat. Then a call on the burner phone shattered the tense quiet, the voice on the other end calm, but edged with a menace that made Clara's stomach clench. He listened, jaw tightening, eyes hardening, and for the first time, she saw the man she had begun to trust falter, his calm veneer cracking just enough to reveal fear, frustration, and raw urgency. Clara's hands tightened on the wheel, instinct screaming as he directed her to take a sudden right, down a narrow street lined with abandoned warehouses, moonlight slicing through the shadows like blades, and she obeyed without question, the children's safety and the fragile trust between them outweighing every other thought. The safe house came into view, a nondescript building that offered minimal protection, but it would have to suffice. And as she parked in the shadows, her body coiled with tension. She felt the weight of every heartbeat, every movement, every decision pressing down like a physical force. Inside, they moved with careful precision, the twins secured on the beds, the man checking locks and windows, scanning for threats, while Clara worked to calm herself, to calm the babies, to prepare for whatever was coming. The quiet was broken by the sudden appearance of intruders, figures masked and armed, and Clara's reflexes took over, wrench in hand, adrenaline surging through her veins as she moved to protect the twins and the wounded man who had become her anchor. The confrontation was chaotic, precise, and terrifying. Bodies moved, weapons flashed, and every action was a dance of survival, coordinated with a synchronicity that neither had anticipated yet had come to rely upon. Clara neutralized threats with the wrench, her hands slick with blood muscles, trembling with exertion and fear. while the man beside her moved with lethal efficiency, disarming, restraining, and controlling the situation, with a calm born of years of experience. In the aftermath, bodies lay unconscious or restrained, the immediate danger abated. But the tension lingered, thick and suffocating, the air charged with the knowledge that any wrong move could bring death to them all. Clara, shaking but resolute, lifted the twins, her heart hammering. Chest tight with a mixture of fear, relief, and an odd exhilaration, feeling the warmth of the children against her as the man secured the perimeter, vigilant and watchful, yet allowing for a brief, fleeting moment of humanity to pass between them. Words were few, measured, each syllable heavy with meaning. The reality of their circumstances, the impossibility of returning to ordinary life, the understanding that trust had become both a lifeline and a weapon. In the quiet moments that followed, as Clara fed and soothed the twins, she caught herself studying the man beside her, the sharp angles of his face softened by exhaustion, and the rare glimpses of tenderness, realizing that amidst the violence, chaos, and danger, something human and fragile had taken root. A bond forged in the crucible of necessity, fear, and shared responsibility. And then came the realization. They could not stay, could not linger, for the danger was constant, and the moment of peace was a brief interlude, a pause before the storm would resume. They prepared to move again, gathering supplies, checking the twins, securing weapons, and planning the route with meticulous care, every decision weighted with consequence, every glance laden with unspoken questions of loyalty, trust, and survival. The van became both vessel and sanctuary, the children sleeping as they drove through empty streets and shadowed alleys, every turn calculated. Every sound analyzed, the man beside her, alert, protective, and quietly teaching her the rhythms of survival she had not known she could master. When at last they reached the outskirts of the city, a safe house waiting like a fortress in the darkness, Clara felt a measure of relief, yet she knew instinctively that the calm was temporary, a fragile illusion. The man secured the doors, checked the windows, and for the first time allowed himself a moment to breathe, his eyes meeting hers, with an intensity that conveyed gratitude, reliance, and something deeper, something unspoken, yet powerful, the acknowledgement of trust earned and shared. As the twins slept, Clara settled beside them, exhausted but vigilant, her mind replaying every decision, every movement, every heartbeat that had brought them to this precarious sanctuary. She understood, with a mixture of awe and fear, that the bond between them was irrevocable, forged not by choice but by circumstance, and that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, each step a testament to courage, resilience, and the fragile, indestructible humanity that had carried them through the storm. And in the quiet of that temporary haven, amidst the blood, rain, and chaos, Clara realized something profound. She had been transformed, no longer the woman defined by debt, grief, and survival alone, but a guardian, a protector, and a participant in a life far greater, far more dangerous and far more beautiful than she could have ever imagined. The world outside remained indifferent, relentless, and dangerous. Yet inside that warehouse, in the warmth of shared vigilance, in the presence of trust, love, and fragile hope, Clara Benson, the wounded man, and the twins had carved a small, unshakable sanctuary. A family forged in fire, blood, and the determination to survive together no matter the cost. The morning after the last narrow escape, Clara Benson woke to a fragile quiet that felt almost foreign. The twins slept in their car seats, the soft rise and fall of their small chests, a steady reminder of why she had survived every chaotic, violent, terrifying step of the past days. The man now sitting against the wall with his gun resting across his knees was awake too, eyes tracing every movement she made with a cautious warmth, the tension that had defined him slowly giving way to a rare, steady presence. For the first time, Clara allowed herself to breathe fully, the adrenaline of the past nights gradually ebbing, replaced by a careful, wary sense of security. Together they moved through the motions, feeding, changing, securing supplies, checking exits, and mapping out their next moves. There was no idle chatter, but in their shared glances, in the brief touches and mutual care for the children, there was understanding, gratitude, and the unspoken acknowledgement that they had become more than partners in survival, They were a family forged in fire and blood. Plans formed in hushed tones, temporary safe houses, rotating routes, contingency plans should pursuit close in again. Clara noticed subtle changes in him. The way he allowed her to take initiative, the rare flashes of humor or relief, the way his body relaxed, just slightly, when the twins were safe and warm. They could not stay in one place for long, yet in the slow, deliberate routines, they created pockets of stability, small islands of normalcy amid the chaos. And slowly, carefully, Clara let herself consider what this new life meant. She had chosen to protect him, to save the twins, to risk everything she had. In doing so, she had found courage she didn't know she possessed, and in the silent acknowledgement of trust, she discovered something more, the possibility of hope, connection, and love. The man beside her, wounded, dangerous yet fiercely protective, mirrored her feelings in subtle ways. A softened gaze when the babies stirred, a quiet reassurance when she faltered, a hand hovering near hers in silent solidarity. Days passed with tense caution and careful strategy, yet gradually the immediate terror receded. Clara began to allow herself fleeting moments of lightness. A shared smile when the twins cooed, a quiet laugh when a small disaster was averted, a brief warmth when he placed a hand on her shoulder, steadying her more than she could articulate. And then came the moment of truth. They had reached a point where hiding indefinitely was no longer possible, where the life they had salvaged demanded that they make a choice. To remain fugitives forever, or to take a stand that would secure some semblance of freedom. Together, they prepared, gathering essentials, planning exits, and most importantly, solidifying the trust and unspoken bond that had carried them through blood and danger. The twins, once fragile symbols of vulnerability, had become the anchor, their very existence a driving force in every decision. When they finally stepped outside the temporary sanctuary, van loaded and routes mapped, Clara felt a strange, profound steadiness settle in her chest. The world was still dangerous, the enemies still out there, but for the first time she realized that she was not alone. She had a partner who had earned her trust, whose instincts matched her own, whose willingness to risk everything for the children mirrored her own. They moved through the city with careful precision, but this time there was less fear and more control, the bond between them now a quiet, unshakable strength. In the small moments between danger, Clara watched him cradle the twins, saw the softness in his eyes, the tenderness that belied his lethal exterior, and felt something shift inside her. A recognition that what had begun as survival had grown into something far deeper. Trust, love, and a commitment that could not be broken by the chaos outside. Weeks passed in a rhythm of cautious freedom, secure locations, careful routines, and the ever-present awareness that danger lurked. Yet amidst it all, Clara allowed herself to hope. She saw the man laugh softly when the twins slept, peacefully heard his whispered words of gratitude when she completed a task that eased his burden, and understood that the fragile threads of connection between them had become a sturdy, resilient bond. In the safety of their hidden life, in the warmth of shared vigilance, Clara realized the profound transformation she had undergone. No longer the woman defined by debt, grief, and near helplessness, but a guardian, a protector, and a participant in a life filled with purpose, courage, and the fragile, powerful magic of trust. And when the twins woke one morning, bright-eyed and cooing, reaching for the hands that had saved them, Clara felt a deep, unwavering certainty. They had survived the storm, forged a family from chaos, and claimed a future that, though uncertain, was theirs to shape together. Outside, the world remained indifferent, dangerous, and unforgiving. Yet within their carefully chosen sanctuary, they had carved a place of warmth, resilience, and connection. Clara, the man who had become her anchor, and the twins had not only survived, they had found each other, and in doing so, discovered the extraordinary power of courage, trust, and love in a world that offered none of it freely. The sun rose over the city, light spilling across streets and rooftops, and Clara finally allowed herself to smile. For the first time in a long time, she felt whole. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. They were alive. They were a family, and for now that was enough. Sometimes the world throws us into chaos and survival feels impossible, yet courage, trust, and the bonds we form can change everything. In the darkest moments, even the smallest act of bravery can create a new path, a fresh beginning, and a family where you least expect it. This story reminds us that strength isn't just physical. It's the courage to protect, to care, and to trust when everything is at stake. Life can change in an instant, and one choice, one act of compassion, can define everything that comes after. Emily's journey shows that even in a world full of danger and uncertainty, hope and humanity can survive, and sometimes they even flourish. If you like this story, make sure you subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share with your friends and family so you don't miss the next powerful story coming your way. Drop a heart in comment, like and subscribe my channel, and visit my channel for more interesting story videos.